Well, welcome everyone to the second panel. If you were here for the first, thank you for staying for the second. This one will have additional information that will be very valuable. So this one, we're going to actually focus on quantum strategy. So what does it look like to actually bring quantum technology forward, not just from the hardware perspective, but more from the workforce perspective, how do organizations move forward and strengthen their quantum muscle, as we talked about in the last panel. Before we get started, I'd love to give, well, I guess you know three of them. I don't know if you want to introduce yourselves again for people in the room, but also Steve is new to the panel, so whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, sure. Will Oliver, professor at MIT. I work in quantum computing. I'm also an educator and led the course development of four, now five with Steve, professional development courses through MIT X Pro, really targeting people who are not necessarily physicists or engineers by training, but have some degree, professional degree, you want to pivot to quantum. These are good courses to help you in that journey.
Back in 2019, I did an internet search of who's got the best quantum computing course in the world. And it said MIT and it said Will Oliver. And so I went and I registered for Will's courses. I took 4 of his courses. I used that information back at work. And I fell in love with this technology that I just made it what I do as an industry. So I was at HSBC for 20 years. Now I'm a recovering banker. And I opened my own company, consulting company, Horizon X, doing some stuff with the quantum index, which I'm sure we'll talk about here. And I'm an advisor to McKinsey on quantum computing.
Thanks, Steve. I'm Sumit Kapoor. I'm CEO of Zapata Quantum, and we're focused on the software side of quantum. Our mission is to accelerate the development of quantum applications. And we were spun out of Harvard's Quantum Computing Lab in 2018. And since then, we've done some foundational work in the field, including research work with DARPA and commercial work with folks like BP, BASF, BMW, and others.
Perfect.
No, go ahead.
Yes, I'm Garrison Buss, CTO at QSecure, filling in as a much better looking version of Rebecca Krothmer, who is now coming up to take the stand.
Rebecca's going to sing a song. I found out she was a singer last night. I didn't know that. But for being late, you have to sing.
C, D. Oh, sorry. Hey, everyone. I'm Rebecca Krothmer, CEO at QSecure.
Fantastic. Okay, so we have quite the diversity on the panel. So we have education, we have consulting, and then we have industry representing both the AI, more use case application side, and also the security side. And so we're really curious about strategy and what sorts of challenges exist for organizations today or the quantum industry as a whole. So for each of you in your different perspectives, I'd love to hear from you on what you think one of the main challenges of bringing quantum forward is related to whether it's education, is it organizations choosing the right challenges, is the organizations implementing the challenges? So Will, I don't know if you want to take that question.
Sure, thanks. I won't claim that this is the most important. I think that they're all important, but let me just address one of them. I think education is quite important. If we want quantum to be an industry in the future, we need to develop a workforce, and that's key. It needs to happen, of course, at universities. We train students who then go out into the world and work in these industries. But there's also a much larger workforce that's already working, and they need to pivot. Some of them need to pivot to quantum, understand what it is. A good analogy is that people who design, say, chips or write software, most of those people don't know how the fundamental semiconductor works in a transistor, right? You don't need to have that level of knowledge because we've been so successful in abstracting away that technology so that you can write a computer program without understanding fully how the chip works. And we need to get there with quantum. And it starts with professional development type programs to help people understand what is quantum, how is it different than classical, and how can I use my expertise, which is not quantum, but it's important, and apply it to quantum. And I think of it as a university. I think the last statement I'll make is I think of it like a university where we have so many departments at a university, not just physics and electrical engineering. We have chemistry and biology and sociology and even business school. Because if it's going to become a commercial endeavor, we need people who understand and have MBAs and understand how finance works to do that. And they need to have some knowledge of quantum, which is why I teamed up with Steve and made a course, and I'm sure he'll tell you about that now.
We kicked off a course. And so I told you about the 4 courses that I took from Will. And I love the way Will teaches quantum because it really helped me understand. But the one thing I did understand was that there wasn't an executive one for executives. The funny thing is I went back and I got the board to give us all this money, and I got money to pay for all these CEOs of the bank to learn quantum. Now we have 64 different countries. When I used to work at this bank, how many CEOs, I paid for the course, by the way, for them to go to MIT. How many CEOs do you think took me up on the offer to do the course at MIT? Anybody? Just throw out numbers. 0. Absolutely. Can you imagine? Oh, you heard this before. That's unfair. Okay. I'm not going to ask her any more questions. Don't let her in the room next. No, I'm just kidding. And that was actually surprising. Now, when I asked the CEOs why, they said, look, I just don't have the time to dedicate to this. And so a couple of years ago, I approached Will and I said, Will, we need to create something for executives so that people understand. And from a strategy perspective, that was very important because, right now, during the time we were going through the AI phase, and we were asking, do you have an AI strategy? Now, I'm sure if I ask people in this room, do you have an AI strategy? Hopefully, I see some nodding heads, no. They would probably, some may even say yes, and I would say, well, have you seen it? And they'll probably say no, or have you read it? And they'll probably say no. So when it comes to quantum, I think quantum's a technology that's fundamentally going to change things. And I could tell you, if you don't think it's about computing, well, think about sensing and think about security, because Rebecca's going to scare you to tell you why you should care about security. But waiting is not a strategy. So what I saw is I want to help people develop a strategy, educate themselves, and I'd like to give exposure to what really brought me into this industry and really changed my life. So I think it was a great course, and that's why we're offering it. And yes, I will tell you about the discount code so you guys can get the best price possible.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that the challenge that I see most often is maintaining momentum. I think the companies come in and they're quick to move towards a proof of concept and say, hey, we need to evaluate this particular use case. We have this particular algorithm. We have this particular idea, and it might be somebody who's not at the top highest level who's making that level of commitment, and then you have a situation where somebody has this proof of concept that says, hey, there is a particular promise here, but we're going to have to wait some time for this to actually mature, and we stall out. And the truth is that what you need instead is to build a quantum muscle. And at the end of the day, as Steve said, this is a fundamentally different way of thinking about things. For those who weren't in the last panel, I mentioned a quote from the physicist von Neumann, who was around at the time of the advent of classical computers, and he said that the most important applications will be the ones that are most unpredictable, that are most far off from what is feasible today. So what we really need is the muscle to be able to develop those applications, to understand what is possible, to run the analysis, to say, hey, this is what we need to do to mature this application, to optimize, and all of those steps need to be something that's embedded in an organization. Now, the organizations that do that, BCG estimates that 90% of the value that's going to be created by quantum is going to be retained by 10% of the organizations, the ones that are the most forward in this approach. And when we're talking about the value, we're talking about $2 trillion of value by 2035, according to McKinsey. So if there's an organization out there that's actually the organizations that are going to build that muscle, build the team in the spirit of both what Will and Steve said, that's going to maintain momentum and get around that challenge of stalling out.
So I'm on the security side. And I think on the security side, we have a different, in some ways, opposite problem to the quantum side, in that many people are familiar with the threat of quantum computing to data security, right? And no, okay, I'll do a brief. So thank you. Quantum computers at scale will be able to break the security that we rely on to keep data private as it goes between us, our banks, the government, protects national security, electronic health records, our emails. Every time you send something or receive something and you want it to be private, that's protected with encryption. And that's what keeps it private. Quantum computers at scale, we know that they break that encryption. Now, we're not quite there yet with quantum computers, but it's a yesterday problem because of this idea of harvest now, decrypt later attacks. So as you send that data, in certain cases, a bad actor can listen in, harvest that data, even if it's encrypted, stockpile it for decryption with a quantum computer. And so if you think about the kind of data that has a shelf life, I don't want my text messages or my board meeting minutes or my electronic health records revealed in the coming years, right? So that is why it is an urgent threat. Now, the thing that's different about the security side is you do not need a quantum computer to protect against quantum decryption. There are already government standardized, regular old classical algorithms that can run on classical devices that protect against that kind of decryption. So coming back to the question, one of the biggest challenges, so now that you know that, right? Now that you know that there's already a solution to this big bad problem, you know more than many security leaders. And because it's associated with quantum, right? A lot of people think that it's mysterious, that it's in R&D. No, it is ready, adopt it. This problem is solved if you choose to solve it. And that piece of education is a really critical piece of education that we need to get out because this is a massive problem that's coming down as folks develop algorithms and quantum computers that can do amazing things, but also pose that big of a threat.
Thank you. So out of all of these answers, we focused a lot on education, on how we communicate about quantum. Steve, I like that you touched on the course that's specific for leadership who needs to know about quantum. They don't necessarily need to know at a technical level, but they need to understand concepts and how it can affect their businesses. So what I want to do is kind of take a look at this through two lenses in terms of workforce. So one, Will, coming from education, on one side of this, what skill sets are most important to you when you're looking at educating the next workforce? And then from an industry perspective, what skill sets do you feel like are missing or lacking or you'd like to see more of when you're bringing on new employees that need to work on the software stack or on the hardware stack?
Yeah, so as I thought about it, I don't know, 8-9 years ago, as we developed the first 4 courses, what I wanted to do is create a course that was intuitive, gave visceral, visual understanding of these concepts of quantum so that, you never needed to write down an equation. And I think we were pretty successful in doing that. But if you ask me generally, what skill set do people need coming into quantum? I would say that, of course, we do need a basic level of math, right? It is a STEM field. We do need a basic level of math. And what level are we talking about? Something like a linear algebra level of mathematics. I think most of us do learn that in a university, experience at some point. Beyond that, though, I think a good familiarity with existing STEM. When I explain quantum, I often make analogies to conventional computing, transistors. The history of classical computing, I think, is quite instructive because almost all of quantum, it's not the same as classical, but it definitely rhymes, right? And if you understand what we have today currently, then it's a small pivot to what quantum is, right? And so I try to leverage as much as possible what most of us already know. And if we don't, we fill in those gaps. That's fine. When trying to explain quantum. But quantum is different. And the biggest barriers, I would say, is the jargon, right? Physicists love to use jargon, acronyms. What do all these words mean? Sounds hocus pocus, spooky action at a distance, all this stuff. You're like, wow, what is that? But then when you see it, you're like, oh, that's all that is, right? And so that's what we try to do in the course, and basically those skills are all that's required. Steve?
Yeah, the funny thing is I love analogies. So I always use the analogy that quantum is like a marathon. Nobody shows up the day of a marathon and just starts running, right? You need to prepare first. And so preparing is really educating yourself, understanding what this technology can do and what it can't do. You'd be surprised on what it can't do. The fact that there are certain very specific things it does so much better than classical computers is what makes it exciting. But there's a lot of stuff classical computers will always do better than quantum computers. So getting that understanding, getting that muscle memory that Sumi talked about building experiments. The best way to learn is get your hands dirty and start understanding this technology and working through it and trying it, get access. Unlike AI, everybody in this room has access to AI, right? From when it comes to quantum, that won't be the case. It's going to be the people who have access to the hardware and the companies, the talent that are going to have that advantage. So if you think, oh, I'll just wait till it gets better, that's going to put you at a disadvantage. And so a lot of things, what I consult my clients is get in now, educate yourself, understand what this technology can do, but then start experimenting, get things wrong. Innovation is about getting things wrong. 99% will fail, but it's that 1% that needs to win. And nobody will, it's like Edison. How many times did he fail building a light bulb? But nobody remembers about Edison's failures. They remember what he was successful about. And quantum's about that. And it's about not being afraid to fail, understand, and it's curiosity. I could tell you, I wasn't a physicist. I'll never become a physicist, but there's a role for everybody in quantum. We're going to need marketers. We're going to need HR people to hire people. We're going to need people in finance. And so I think anybody that is interested, please do not let all of the technical part get you scared. If you want to get technical, absolutely, you can go down that path. But there's room for all of us. I could tell you, everybody knows how to use their iPhone in here, but you don't know all the electronics and everything to make that work. You don't need to know. You just know how to use that technology to get what you want.
Fantastic. Okay, so the next question I wanted to ask is somewhat related. So let's say now that we have we understand where we need to educate, we understand what we need from the workforce. So now internally in the organization, how does that look like from a hierarchical structure? So do you think that we need a chief quantum officer to organize all of these parts, the training, implementing the technology? Or do you foresee implementing teams to build quantum readiness in a different way?
I don't think do you need a chief quantum officer? I think there's a lot of organizations kind of building that. If you look at, and sorry, I'm going to put in a shameless plug, the Quantum Index, you can see kind of all of the industries, automotive, financial services, life sciences, and energy. They're starting to put people that are heads of quantum. And it really depends on how much you want to invest. And so I think it's learning about it. Again, the experiment. There's teams that are as high as 80 people looking at this technology, and some of the people. Do I think you need a head of quantum? No. I think you need people that are going to get in innovation, understand this, and help people experiment and make it easy for people. I think if you can make it frictionless, fast, and cheap, and let people experiment, that's where the magic's going to happen in my mind.
And maybe I'll add one thing is, this will probably fall under the purview of a chief information officer, right? This will be another tool at our disposal to use to process information. And we know that quantum computers don't run by themselves. They're always going to run in tandem with a conventional large computer. So I think it will fall under the CIO.
Absolutely.
And then in terms of choosing quantum internally, so curious, what do you think organizations struggle with the most when it comes to implementing quantum pilots, for instance? Do you think it's maybe misconceptions around the timeline? Is it struggling to choose the right problems? Is it not having the right quantum muscle internally? What would your experience be?
Sure. I think it does get back to really focusing on the result needs to be more about actually building the quantum capacity rather than proving out a particular use case. Because at the end of the day, a lot of what we need to do is to really envision what is possible and to choose the appropriate use cases. And, what makes a good use case in the quantum space? The three parameters that we talk about in the space are: the problem has to be classically hard. Okay. So there are many problems that are very classically hard. So, simulation of quantum mechanics. You cannot take Schrodinger's equation, which is the key equation in quantum mechanics, and run it on a classical computer for situations where you have more than 2 or 3 atoms, right? Which makes quantum chemistry almost intractable, almost unsolvable with respect to classical computers. But on a quantum computer, natively it works, right? So that's a classically hard problem. Other problems that take a great deal of time. So, for example, in financial situations, when insurance companies look to analyze their portfolio, or when trading companies look to price a derivative, it can take a day, it can take actually weeks when you're talking about a very complex portfolio. So this takes a great deal of time. So there are these problems where speed and accuracy are very important, and the classical regime doesn't work, right? So that makes a classically hard problem, right? Which is one of the 3 parameters. The next parameter is quantum easy, right? So you have certain situations where a problem is quantum easy, and those are very complex problems, not necessarily big data problems, because big data, it's hard to get that much data into a quantum computer, but it's a situation where the computation itself is very difficult. So something like Shor's algorithm, which is what Q-Secure is working to resolve the threat due to, that is not a situation which is something that is a big data problem, but it's a very complex problem. The problem of logistics and optimization, when we're talking about supply chain optimization, or the traveling salesman problem, or portfolio optimization, these are problems that quantum computers are very good at. So that's the direction you need to go to. And finally, when you're choosing the right use case, it's about making sure that use case has a great deal of utility. And in terms of that, you need to make sure that utility is measurable. So finance, for instance, is an area where there's a lot of these problems. You can think about derivative analysis. You can think about portfolio optimization, anomaly detection, insurance, etc. Quantum chemistry is a huge area. Quantum simulation for aerodynamics and fluid dynamics. There's lots of different areas where all of these different parameters are met. But in response to your question, you need to build the muscle to be able to select these use cases so that we can actually get a maturity with respect to understanding what we can do with these problems, so we can meet the hardware progress as it's being made.
Thank you. And I think it's really important that you're focusing on the use cases and where we could potentially see early term impact if they start now, and how that aligns with hardware progress. I'm curious from your perspective. So you spoke about why they would choose certain quantum solutions over classical solutions, but how would an organization quantify whether or not they're going to see a return on investment in starting these use cases early on? Or from another angle, if you were to talk to a CFO, how do you convince them that this is a place, that quantum is a place where they need to invest time and lots of money?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I think the most convincing argument is to help them to get creative. And at the end of the day, right now, creativity is what's needed in the space to be able to, the model that I had put out there in the last session was the quantum stack is a 3-layer stack. So you have the why, which is the use cases, the problems that you're solving for, the what, which is the algorithms that are solving and providing the solutions, and the how, which is the hardware execution. And the biggest gap is in the why, in actually connecting the problems to the algorithms. And I think that if you're going to convince a CFO, which I happen to have been a CFO, I think you need to help them understand both the scale of the opportunity and the scale of the threat, right? At the end of the day, you're talking about a $2 trillion opportunity, and that's McKinsey's estimate by 2035. And yes, that's a great opportunity to be able to unlock that value. But the threat is, if you don't unlock it, your competitors will unlock it. And that's going to, especially if you think about a situation in finance, the first company to accomplish derivative pricing with quantum computing is going to crush the competition. The first insurance company to unlock insurance pricing with quantum computing is going to crush the competition. The first logistics company to unlock the logistics problem, the first drug discovery problem. You can go on and on and on. There's so many of these use cases where there's an intractable problem that is going to be solved in quantum computing. And if you're not the company to solve it, your competition will. And as I said before, BCG estimates that 90% of this $2 trillion of value will go to 10% of the parties that are the most progressive. So I think that the convincing argument is, hey, there's massive scale here. There's a lot of potential applications. And if you start to train people on the diversity of those potential applications and the scale of the opportunity and threat, then it becomes clear that you need to invest and invest soon.
And also, Rebecca, I'd love to hear from the security side.
Yeah, I am coming at it from the security side, but one great way to get people excited about quantum and to show early value is through the cybersecurity side. So we go in and we do pilots where the cybersecurity team and the leaders can show to their board results. Hey, I've protected this online banking application for our customers. We did it really quick. See how cool that is. And I've seen in virtually every engagement we've been in, as soon as people get their hands on it and as soon as the people that we work with really see and start to understand it, a quantum evangelist is born. Like there are so many people that we've worked with that they then make quantum becomes their life, the thing that they're passionate about, and then they go evangelize that throughout the org because they see, hey, I've dipped my toe in. This world is so cool. And cybersecurity is one where people can really see and understand the impact. And you can go show it off to your customers. We made the thing quantum protected. But that's also a really good angle to come in at to catalyze that quantum motion within an organization.
Fantastic. And for end users that are interested in starting their quantum journey but have not yet done so, how would you advise them to take the first concrete steps toward, one, building the team, but also what applications should they be focused on based on where we're starting to see the best outlook for quantum computers?
Well, I would even say before you look at applications and building a team, educate yourself. And sorry, I got the shameless plug again. Horizon X, all caps at the MIT website. No, seriously, understand what it is. And the last thing you want to do is overinvest or spend too much money. I have so many people that go into large organizations, talk about ROI, unfortunately, and set the wrong expectations. And then you got CFOs chasing you to say, what's my ROI in 3 months? What's my ROI? If you're having that conversation, you're in the wrong room. The reality is this is a future conversation. You need to look at it in tranches. Actually, I'll use McKinsey's term, in horizons. And that's why I call my company Horizon X. Horizon 1 is security. Protect yourself. Quantum communication. Focus on protecting yourself, because I can tell you that this harvest now, decrypt later is a problem. And people talk about Q-Day. If I tell you what, if you had the power of invisibility, would you tell anybody that you had that power? No. Right? Because the power comes in that nobody knows that you have that power. So if I could break your encryption, do you think I'm going to let you know that I can break your encryption? Absolutely not. So you'll never know when Q-Day happens. So the reality is you got to protect yourself now. So what I would say, Horizon 1 is the security. Horizon 2 is maybe looking at quantum sensing and looking at some of that stuff. That's a little bit near term. Now, Horizon 3 is the quantum computing, but you can't wait till where it's ready. Look at companies. Who knows what's the most valuable company in the world? Anybody? NVIDIA. Do you know that NVIDIA didn't make a profit for the first 8 years of its life? Amazon, 7 years of profit. These were investments. You have to make investments in these technologies, and these new companies, these Googles, these Amazons, these NVIDIAs are going to come out of this technology, and who knows what the names may be. Maybe they're a company called Atlantic Quantum that gets sold to Google. Oh, sorry, that's Will's company. Did we talk about your company getting sold to Google? You guys give him a round of applause. He just sold his company to Google in October. Sorry. Don't worry, John, I'll embarrass you. It's his birthday, by the way. I'll embarrass all. No, I'm just kidding. So anyway, there's great opportunities, and this is why I find this incredibly interesting. in security, this is going to be the largest upgrade in human history. So if you think that there's no opportunity for you, think about that. Every device, every software has to be upgraded through its cryptography. There's no choice, unless you want it to be broken. Will, what do you think?
Oh, you bring up an interesting point that I wanted to follow up on, which is, and you asked earlier, what are the barriers? I think one of the barriers to my mind is related to irrational exuberance, right? People saying and getting excited. There's a lot of hype around quantum computing because quantum computing will do very amazing things in the future, and so then people get excited and there's hype because of the promise, and then they're like, okay, well, what's my return on investment in 3 years, right? And the way that I look at it is historically, and I think of conventional classical computing. You can ask a question. People ask me all the time, when are we going to have a quantum computer? And then I return and I say, well, when did we have a classical computer? What date was it that thing happened? And of course, we don't know the answer to that because that's not how technology evolves, right? You can go back to the 40s when we had vacuum tube computers. They weren't very powerful, but they did something useful. And then in the 1950s and 60s, we had mainframes, right? Mostly scientific computing. We weren't using them, most of us. 70s, okay, now we have a chip that Intel made, right? And it was used in a calculator, right? Still not very powerful. Wasn't until the 90s, right, that we had Pentium Pro with millions of transistors. Okay, now it's starting to get interesting. And here we are 30 years later, AI revolution in NVIDIA. So it took 80-ish years to get from there to here. Now, am I a Debbie Downer and saying, hey, it's going to take 80 years to get a quantum computer? No, because we were deriving commercial value that whole time, right? And we will do that with quantum. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take scaling. You mentioned NVIDIA. Jensen Huang was asked, as many of you know, about a year ago at GTC, when are we going to have a quantum computer, right? And he said, 15 years, that's a little early. 30 years, that's a little long. I think if you said 20 years, most of us would agree with you. I happen to agree with him. And of course, all of the stocks in quantum all tanked because, oh my God, it's going to take 20 years for a quantum computer. And I've been saying it's going to happen in 3 years, right? But I actually agree with him because when he was asked that question, he's interpreting it to mean, when are we going to have the quantum computer that's inventing a new pharmaceutical drug? Or when are we going to have a quantum computer that does these amazing things that we're all dreaming about? Yeah, it's probably going to take 20 years, realistically. But it's not that nothing is going to happen between now and year 20, and then suddenly this quantum computer that's all powerful appears, right? Of course not. It's going to evolve over time. And we will find commercial applications in the much nearer term. Now, they may not be that exciting, just like in the 50s, it may not have been that exciting what we were doing with those computers back then. But we will find commercial applications. They'll generate revenue. Companies will make money. They'll use that money to further develop the quantum computer. It will become more powerful the next year. We're all going to buy new laptops in a couple of years because they're better than the ones we have now. This is going to start a virtuous cycle, right? And of course, 6 months later, he was asked again, and he said, no, I was thinking of like the end game. But of course, NVIDIA has an effort in quantum today, right? Because he knows that this is coming.
Just one comment. He said that, and then he felt so bad for the quantum companies that he created a quantum day at NVIDIA, and their stocks went right back up. So I thought that was really nice.
Great. And Will, you mentioned something at the beginning about irrational exuberance, and I really love this phrase. And this is great. And I'm curious from each of your perspectives, what signals should leaders and in organizations be looking at to understand when the technology is getting to the point where they absolutely should be investing? Obviously, we're talking about they should start investing now, but what are those signals that they should be paying attention to?
Yeah, I would say that the most important signal is going to be scale and quantum error correction. Now, one thing to be careful of, if you were to go out and buy, say, a new laptop, what you really care about is how many transistors are in there. How many transistors in my GPU? 100 billion transistors. Maybe we'll scale it and get 200 billion transistors. The only reason the number matters, and only the number, is because transistors are basically perfect, right? They never make mistakes. And so all that really matters is how many do you have and how fast they are and how low energy it is, right? But with quantum computers, our qubits are not that good yet, right? 1 error in 1,000, 1 error in 10,000. So the number is not as important as how performant it is, right? You need both, of course, ultimately. So the signal that I would look for is, when do we have quantum error correction that's working so that my error rates are something like 1 in a billion or 1 in a trillion? Because as Sumit will tell you, any of the algorithms that we want to run are going to have to run for a billion or a trillion operations to get the answers that are useful, right? So that's the signal that I would look for.
Well, that's something. I'll look at it from a little bit of more of a business cycle perspective. And what I would say is that, as we all know, the point where you're at today is less important than the rate of change, right? And I'd say that the most important signal is how quickly change is happening in the space. And, when we look at the pace of technological change, the reason why all the stocks shot up in fall of 2024 is because technological change happened more quickly than was anticipated. All of a sudden, Google demonstrated quantum advantage. Now, not for a particularly useful problem, but Google demonstrated quantum advantage. And that drove a great deal of additional investor interest, and it drove a great deal of commercial interest. Microsoft quickly thereafter declared 2025 to be the year of quantum readiness. So all of a sudden you have this increased investor interest and increased commercial interest, which of course is going to drive more rapid progress because more people are going to be investing. So the pace of change starts to move much more quickly, and the flywheel is turning very fast. And so I think the signal there is, hey, how quickly is the transformation happening? And then the closely related signal is, how much are my competitors investing? Because if the pace of change is moving very quickly and my competitors are investing and I'm not, then I'm in trouble. And I'll tell you that right now the situation is such that the pace of change is accelerating. People are moving very quickly. And there are some forward-thinking organizations, some who we've worked with, for example, BP, that's heavily investing. And if their competitors are not investing, then they're going to win the race in quantum chemistry. JP Morgan, heavily investing. If there's going to be advances in quantum finance, they're going to win the race. So there's only going to be a few winners, but if the pace of change is very quick and people are investing, then I think as a business person, you should focus on those signals.
I always tell people too, just simply, when you start reading news stories where a quantum computer has helped solve a problem that you recognize, rather than something like boson sampling or something that doesn't sound applicable to maybe your everyday life, that's when things are starting to heat up.
And I think, so we now have 10 minutes left for questions. So if anyone has any questions for the panelists, right there.
You mentioned about errors in computing. What do you mean by that? I mean, what is the outcome of the errors in practice, in real practice?
Yeah, so when we talk about errors, it's exactly what probably you would intuit, which is that I get the wrong answer, right? That's what an error means in a computer. So if your computer, maybe you could think of it as crashing, but if you type in what is 3 times 3 and you get 6, that's an error, right? And when we run quantum algorithms, it's very much the same thing, is that we're in some large state space. We start where we know we are, 3 times 3, and we want to take steps in an algorithm to get to the answer 9. But as I run my algorithm, if it takes me somewhere else and says 6 or some other answer that's not 9, that's an error, right? It could be more than one error. It might be multiple errors that took me to the wrong place. So it's basically the quantum computer not doing what it's supposed to do. That's what an error is, yeah. Yep. Oh, let me make sure I got the question right. So you're developing a legal tech product and it's being developed, of course, on a conventional computers, the one that actually work. And, and do we need to throw it all away and switch it over to quantum later? And the answer is no. Quantum computers will not solve every problem that we have. And they're not going to replace conventional computers for most tasks, right? But there are specific things, particularly in the area of scientific computing, quantum chemistry, material science, simulation, where quantum computers will vastly outperform conventional computers. But quantum computers, you know, they actually can do the same things that classical computers, conventional computers can do, but they often do it no better. Usually worse, because quantum computers are actually pretty slow comparatively. But for certain problems, right, particularly scientific computing, even though they're slower in doing the step-by-step, the overall speed of the calculation is much, much faster. Yeah.
So I want an honest answer about AI. So we know that, well, I can imagine how it might help during training of a model to find the right parameters. But normally you need to insert huge amounts of data in order to train a model, and definitely in inference where the model is stable. The main thing is to push as much data as possible, as quickly as possible. So I imagine it might not serve as a good problem to solve.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ayal. Quantum, you can think of it this way. Quantum is big processing, right? But it's not big data. And the reason is that all of the data that we're probably interested in currently resides on a hard drive in a classical computer, right? It's classical data, and we need to get all that classical data into our quantum computer so that it can process it. But there's a classical bottleneck in doing that. And still very much at the research stage, but one way to circumvent that, right, would be to either identify some structure in the data that you can leverage to put it in efficiently, or you take a quantum sensor and you connect it directly to the quantum computer. You never get classical information out. You quantumly connect it to the computer. Then it's a different story. But that's very much at the research stage.
Thanks.
Hi, so I guess I'm a very recent entry into the quantum world, and I got really excited because I got taken to a drinks party next to a big golden chandelier in IBM a year and a half ago. And I know you answer questions about what makes you excited and what introduces people, but that genuinely made it feel real. It looked sparkly. I have chandeliers in my house, and I thought, I relate to this. And then the piece about the entanglement aspect of, I know that if I've been close to someone, they're far away from me, I can feel when something's happening to them, even though I may not say something. So that helped it all feel very real, and even if slightly esoteric. And listening to Rebecca speak yesterday, actually talking about the fact that you can use regular computer software now to actually prepare yourself for post-quantum. And I now do strategy for a defense AI company, was really reassuring. So I guess the question is, how can we get our teams at home to feel that this is possible and not just exciting, but viable and worth spending not a huge amount of money, but something on now to get going? And actually, when the fear is being spread as if that's what sells newspapers, that's what gets you money, and that actually this is a good news story, it's possible, it's affordable, and it's now.
You know what? I think AI actually did quantum a disservice. I had a whole team focused on quantum, and because then AI took off, they took these quantum physicists and moved them over to AI. Now these guys are like, I don't know anything about AI. And so right now the narrative, kind of the hype on quantum is taking that over. But, I think people will come. I think, the security side is getting people interested. Yes, it's scaring them, I think, unnecessarily, but but you need to act now. So to Rebecca's point, we do need to solve that now. Governments know that because they're putting in regulations. The U.S. government has put out 2 executive orders. I think by 2026, by the end of this, or is it now already?
End of 2026.
End of 2026, Homeland Security will not onboard any vendors that's not PQC enabled. So in other words, if you want to work for the government or have government contracts and you're not PQC enabled, you're not going to be able to work for the government or even your vendors. And I think that's going to be important. It's going to push. When regulators now tell you you have to get it done, you got to get it done. And there's going to be a mad chase to make sure you're PQC enabled. But people who start early, it's going to be less complex and less costly. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. I just wanted to agree with you and say that, yeah, I think that anytime we can connect quantum computing to something that we already know and are familiar with or are beautiful or intuitive, that this is going to bring people in. We demystify quantum because at the end of the day, the world is quantum mechanical. And in some way, we're already familiar with it. We just don't know it because physicists like to use fancy words and acronyms, and it makes it sound weird. But at the end of the day, there are aspects to it are weird. But once you understand 3 or 4 principles, you say, okay, that's the way the world works.
You can invest and have your relatively small investment, have your team take the MIT courses. These have been the gold standard for many years for getting people into quantum. And then, shameless plug, right? We do free PQC pilots to show people ROI without spending money to show them they can do this. Final plug, if anyone wants to get involved, right? Dip your toe in. Zapata is publicly traded. You can invest, like I own shares. You can start investing in quantum a little bit, and that'll be a way to help you be invested in following the quantum space more and more too.
So I was about to ask you about regulations because we didn't really point it out to that yet. But thank you, Steve. You already pointed out US have the regulations start to coming out, but this is like a global situation. So the entire protocols, internet, everything is always global. US is doing their own thing. Europe have their own thing. They're putting on new algorithms, new protocols together. And Asia is doing totally completely new things. How are we going to be like in the spirit of Davos? How are we going to like combine them together to making sure we'll be ready to have the quantum to be the next wave, semi-computer currently is being communicated?
Well, the good news is they all agree they need to do something. They're just disagreeing on what that standard is, right? So a lot of people agree with the US standard, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the algorithms they put out. I know South Korea has put out, Germany has put out. And so the good thing is they all recognize they have to do something. They're just all saying, we want our standard or we want anything. And that's good. I think the reality is we all want the best security out there. And if people are taking steps, I usually say, you don't have to, if you're being chased by a lion, you don't have to be the fastest person. Just don't be the slowest person, to protect yourself. But maybe Rebecca.
I was just going to say that there's actually a lot more cooperation in this space. In Europe, I think it's called SD, and they work very closely with NIST, and they all agree on the same standards. And I'm not familiar with what the PRC is doing, for example, or some other countries in Asia. But I think by and large, we are actually working together because we know that this is so important.
Regulation. Security needs to happen now. There's likelihood that the mandated timelines for migrating to quantum security are about to be pushed in. Thankfully. So that's first step, and in the US and in many countries, that regulation is happening, and I'm happy about that. So that's one good thing.
All right. In the same vein as the last question, in 2024, I was given a stat: the number of PhD graduates with a quantum background in the U.S. with a U.S. citizenship was less than 50. Well, we heard less than 50. Less than 50. Yep. With the U.S. citizenship. That being said, one of the areas potential collaboration is workforce development. Now, I'm excited to hear about what you're doing in professional development, but what can we do here at Davos? What can we do to do workforce development across the K through 12 and the higher ed?
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly at the graduate school level, it's very important that we train people, right? And not just in physics and engineering, but across most disciplines, because quantum is getting to the scale, whether it's sensing or communication or processing, that, we need people who do more than just physics, right? It started there, but that's not where it's going to end and be successful. I would say we need to, break down borders for one thing. We need to make sure that we fund the educational side of this at a level that's commensurate with the need, right? Of course, we want to commercialize, but we can't over-focus on commercialization if we want to train people who have a breadth of knowledge that is then useful in the commercial domain. And I think we do that pretty well, but I think we can do it better, actually. And part of it, whether it's U.S. citizenship or other citizenships, let's make it easier in the U.S. and at MIT, let's make it easier for people to come to the U.S. and study. And when they get here, let's make it easier for them to stay, right? Yeah.
Will for president.
So unfortunately, we are now out of time, but a big thank you to all who came, and also a big round of applause for all of our panelists. Those were some excellent answers.